Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying the session thus far. As Andrew mentioned, I have a pretty significant background in public sector over the last decade. And the guest speaker, the distinguished guest speaker that's going to join me in a little bit, also has a long record of public service within the U.S. government and is going to join me and talk a little bit about some of the trends and things that he has certainly seen over the last 12 to 18 months and where we need to take a look at going forward. So today, what we want to focus on really is the concept around cyber espionage, cyber warfare, cyber crime. Really, the acronym CHEW is a good way to look at this thing. CHEW basically stands for cybercrime. Okay? The H stands for hacktivism. The E stands for espionage. And the W stands for warfare. Okay? So if you remember that CHEW philosophy, or if you chew on that, and that's really the acronym created by Dick Clark, who was a former advisor also for President Bush in the U.S. government when it comes to cybersecurity. Those are elements we're going to take a look at today. We're going to talk about some of the trends and expound on what Andrew and Ryman have said this morning, but also dive a little bit deeper in with Howard's expertise, really focus on what's going out there in the current threat landscape. So what are the outcomes from this morning's conversation? Well, first and foremost, how might we learn from organizations and the elite hacking crews? All right, we're going to touch on that. We're going to take a look at some of the most sophisticated hacking crews out there, the nation states that are sponsoring them, as well as the non-state actors that maybe are more concerned around cybercrime and less about cyber warfare, but may contribute to the cyber warfare ecosystem through the activities and what they do. The other component we're going to talk about, certainly targeted attacks. And as Ryman mentioned, APTs are often the buzzword that we see in the industry now. We're going to focus more on the targeted attacks and what does that mean and how might we learn to achieve situational awareness. And what do I mean by situational awareness is what's going on continuously within our ecosystems and our infrastructures. We're going to look at that. Last but not least, we're going to tie up and look at some of the predictions for the rest of this year and beyond. And that's really where Howard and myself are going to dive in, talk about a little bit around policy, a little around the overall trends and what we're seeing and what we need to prepare for going forward. So the new reality, okay? A new threat is created every single second. In some component, an intrusion happens in every 5 minutes. 90% of organizations have some form of active malware on their systems. Extremely scary. Last but not least, we did touch on the mobile malware phenomenon. All right? I often do this, and I'm going to save us from this today. I take a poll in the audience around BYOD and your mobile devices. And the fact that these smartphones are really the key platforms for us accessing the internet. How many of you basically take a look at your smartphone and use it as your primary device to access the internet? It could be your tablet as well. Give me a quick raise of the hand. Access the internet more from your mobile device than your PC. Could be tablet, smartphone, okay? That's pretty much what we see when we do a quick poll. Typically, most people, and I don't know if this is an oxymoron from a smartphone or not, don't often have antivirus or some firewalling or smart browsing technology on that device. So if you think about that, is that really smart when you're accessing social media, your company's corporate networks, all of these things out there without some form of protection on that device? This is what we're dealing with when Ryman refers to bring your own disaster. These devices are getting infected. People don't often understand the level of infection or the order of magnitude, and networks and personal identities are being compromised because we aren't doing the basics to protect these mobile platforms. A huge trend that we're seeing out there, and the bad guys know it. They know that we don't have particular protections on our devices. The basic blocking and tackling that we know we have to have on our PCs, we're not doing that from our mobility platforms. Very scary. What I'm going to do real quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Howard a little bit, I'm going to frame up a little bit more around what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to come back to really 3 main components on how we look at this. And it's what we call the 3 C's. The 3 C's stem from consumerization. That's your BYOD. It stems from cloud or virtualization technologies. And oh, by the way, Kudos to Australia as being probably the leading virtualized country on the planet, okay, with your efforts in enabling virtualization and moving to consolidation. And then the last piece really is cyber threats. That's your targeted attacks. Those 3 C's are what we believe from Trend Micro are the core areas of focus that we need to be looking at in our enterprises. And what best practices do we need to put in place in order to be effective at combating these things? You know, as I started my journey down to Melbourne, and really door to door it was 28 hours, so I had plenty of time to think through some of these things. It was interesting to hear the concept really around the Australian football phenomenon down here, okay, in footy, if you will. Tomorrow I get to partake in that. I'm going to go to the game tomorrow and watch my first footy game. I'm a huge football fan. I think everybody in this room understands or has some association with footy. So one of the things I thought was interesting is the concept of sevens now. Everybody familiar with sevens? Is really exploding in the US. All right? It's a much quicker paced game, and ultimately you're playing with over half of less of the individuals on the team. I tried to draw a similar comparison to give you an analogy within the cyber realm. And what that means is if you go from playing from 15s to 7 on the same field, that creates a lot of gaps. Okay? It's the same kind of concept now with us doing more with less, whether it's sequestration, whether it's the global financial crisis impacting our budgets. This is all impacting how we do business, and the cyber threat, the ever-shifting cyber landscape, is causing us to basically move much more quickly than we ever had before and do that with less people and less resources. So we have to be more intelligent about how we attack that. We've got to play different angles. We've got to fill space. We've got to fill gaps. And that's what we are focusing on as far as core blocking and tackling. In the virtualization world, moving from physical to virtual to cloud. As Sanjay mentioned, many of you are probably repeat folks for being here. We thank you for coming. This is still extremely important. Many people are still going through this journey. What you see and what we're going to talk about in our breakout sessions today is diving in a little bit deeper on how you can protect those ecosystems from zero-day malware attacks, from advanced persistent threats and targeted attacks. All right? These are going to be very, very important, and what you see here are the core tenets of protecting those ecosystems. It's all about the basics of anti-malware. All right? There's still a place for that. We all understand there is no silver bullet. We get that. The anti-malware piece is core blocking and tackling. Signature-based approaches are not going to cut it with this new attack vector and attack sequence that we're seeing out there in the landscape. You're going to have to couple that with some other advanced technologies and weapons to be able to be prepared for these types of attacks. And in the physical virtual cloud world and your overall data center ecosystem, you're going to have also things around intrusion prevention and empowering your guests to be self-defending against these attacks. All right? Firewalling capabilities that let you virtual patch against zero-day Java attacks that you may not have a patch for or you may not be able to get to. How are you supposed to improve your operational efficiencies when you're constantly trying to keep up with patches and move the needle when it comes to that perspective? Integrity monitoring, profiling all of these systems to be able to understand what's changing, good or bad, and be able to react accordingly. And last but not least, ultimately log monitoring. Understanding what events are going on with you in your environment and doing that continuous probing and understanding of everything that's going on. Encryption is another key component. We often talk around data sovereignty and what can we do to protect our data in the cloud, whether it's here, on land, or offshore. Encryption is a key capability to take a look at that. The last piece I want to talk about, and I'm going to bring Howard in a second, is our concept of custom defense. This is really focused on you, the uniqueness of your heterogeneous environment, and ultimately how you're going to defend against it. This is specifically focused on targeted attacks. We really have this three-legged stool that we have to contend with in our environments. It's the BYOD phenomenon, it's the cloud phenomenon, and it's the cyber threat phenomenon. If we don't pay specific attention to all three of these areas, and we suffer in one, that's when we become weak and we become compromised. We have to give emphasis to these three legs of the stool. So what we're talking about really is sophisticated network-wide monitoring and network-wide detection, looking at over all of your protocols, okay? Not just a select few of web and email, all right? Being transparent to everything that's going on, looking at mobility traffic, looking at your iOS device traffic, your Android device traffic. What is it trying to do in my environment? Very, very important. The concept of custom sandboxing is something that really has been evolving over the last 6 to 12 months. And what that means is it allows you to create a padded cell to detonate these forms of malware that are trying to attack and maintain persistence in your environment. It's important to understand the end state of these packages, the end goal of the campaign, so you can better understand how to create a more defensive posture and a more secure posture through those basically offense-informing defense capabilities. Tying it back to a threat network, a threat intelligence big data warehouse to be able to understand, was what I'm seeing in my environment happening elsewhere throughout the globe, and having global ground truth to be effective and understand how you remediate against that, okay? And basically maintaining a constant update presence around what's going on, how do I be able to be focused on the latest threats and correlate that back into my environment. Last but not least, it's really focusing on cloud intelligence, an adaptive-based security model, and ultimately creating what we call a smart protection strategy. If you don't tie those key things in and put emphasis around the best practices in each one of those tenets or silos, your risk profile is going to go up. And again, we're not promising silver bullets. Nobody in the security industry should. All we're basically doing is saying, how can you mitigate and minimize the risk in your environment so if something and when something happens, you have complete understanding of the forensics of that event, you know what the damage is, you know how to fix it, and you know how to move on. Okay? Minimize the damage. Obviously, it's a no-brainer. Information has become our #1 biggest asset. It's all about the data. We're moving it in and out of our private and public clouds. We're making hybrid clouds to be able to move business into the next level. We have to be able to focus on protecting that, and this is self-defending. So no matter where that workload lives, you feel comfortable that your policy, unique to you, and the profile of that particular asset is going to move with it no matter where it goes. All right? So I want to wrap up a little bit, and I think that that journey through time with certainly what Ryman was talking about from a malware history all the way to targeted attacks, and what Howard was able to educate us on really speaks to the evolution and the transformation that we've gone through. You know, I'll leave you with this, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of our time and our agenda. Many of you have seen what you see up here on the board as the attack chain that most miscreants go through when they're trying to compromise and exfiltrate data from your environment. It's pretty basic, but one of the things I want to call out, and ultimately it's very astonishing to me, we recently did a report in the last 6 months coming out of Ryman's group, the Forward Threat Research Group, that really looked at some of the sophisticated hacking crews, not only within China, but Russia, and we basically took a perspective of what's going on. How do they differ? How do they similar? The elements of the attack kill chain you see here are often the blueprint in which they go about things. But the thing that was fascinating is you often hear a lot about the Chinese in the news, okay? But our research and our great work that was done by the Forward Threat Research team really concluded a little bit different story. And the fact that the Russians are certainly an elite class of hacking crew, much like the Chinese. Iran is another sophisticated hacking crew. But one of the unique things that they did was much more stealthy in the way they were going about things. And I think we're hearing more about the Chinese is because they're getting caught and using more common tools than often the Russians do. Okay, and this could be in the form of bulletproof hosting, the different exploit kits that they're using, the custom remote access Trojans that they're using once they get a persistence in your environment. We found out that these were very, very sophisticated means, and the amount of money required to get these types of tools was rather astonishing in the underground. So I'm going to leave you with this. You know, ultimately, if all of us pitched in a couple of dollars here today, we could acquire a serious, massive arms bazaar of cyber weaponry for about a startup cost of $370 and an ongoing mortgage cost of about $220 a month, okay? So for $220 a month, you can have a massive war chest of DDoS capabilities, exploit kits depending on the target that you're doing reconnaissance on, VPN crypto services that let you maintain presence in environment without anybody looking at what you're doing, all right? These things are very, very easy to come by in the underground, and the cost associated with that, they get big investment on that, big return, okay? Because they're able to go be part of a larger scheme that could be in the form of cybercrime or ultimately acting on nation-state activities that are going to cause damage or destruction against an adversary. So I leave you that basically as we get this cost efficiencies that Ryman mentioned around cloud, tools are being democratized for consumption and use, and they're really, really cheap. This has created even more complexity for our environments and how we defend them, okay? Because people are able to acquire these tools very cheaply and wage war against us, not only on our countries, but our businesses. I thank you for your time today. We're going to have a consumerization breakout a little bit later this afternoon, which I'll be moderating. We'll dive a little bit deeper into this bring your own disaster phenomenon and how you can look to strategize against that. We're about ready to have a tea, I believe. And do you want me to turn that over to you, or do we want to? Okay. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you.